Union Boarding School in Carson, Nevada. Now, while he reaffirmed us that he was never beaten, never starved, never abused, he was discouraged from practicing his culture and speaking the language that he spoke at home with his father and with his family. Unfortunately for all of us in this community, that was all it took for so many of our elders to lose that cultural connection for nearly a lifetime. Luckily for my dad, however, he still had fond memories of school with student sock hops, ice cream socials, and getting off the school grounds to visit the neighboring farms. He once told us about working after school hours for a nearby farmer that would pay them, not very much, of course, to harvest potatoes from the nearly frozen ground by hand. Whew, braver than me. I remember him telling me that his hands felt cold as ice, but he and the other kids had fun digging in the dirt. And when they were done, they would collect their, buck or so in payment. And if the farmer was feeling real generous, he'd let each kid take a bucket of fresh milk back to the school. What a treat at the time. Well, at some point, age 12, he was a Boy Scout, which is kind of funny because we had learned that at age 12, he had gotten in trouble stealing a car so that he could joyride with friends. I assume he was just influenced by other boys. After leaving school, my dad was free to pursue his interests. While the Vietnam War raged on, he tried to enlist, but luckily to all of us here, he was denied. Then he got involved with the Job Corps, and then he landed himself in San Francisco in the early days of the American Indian movement. Now, my dad isn't especially political or vocal about his opinions, really, but it was interesting that some of his nephews were just across the bay helping in the takeover of Alcatraz. Dad would then return to the valley and go back to school for steel structural drafting, where he'd eventually work on several notable projects. One included the orange tile semicircles over the entrances at the old Fiesta Mall. Does anyone remember Fiesta Mall? It feels like it was there just yesterday. But he was so proud of this work, and he would tell anyone whenever we'd drive by, and so would my mom whenever we were nearby those orange circles. Unfortunately, Dad was in a car accident at some point that had forced him into a career change due to injuries. He would soon find himself in hospitality and fine dining. He worked then at the Safari restaurant in Central Scottsdale. It was here where he met my mother, Jean, who thought he was just a smooth-talking guy that would earn a paycheck and then disappear for a week or two, which wasn't too inaccurate. In fact, part of their meet-cute story was that my mom was so unimpressed with everyone else's adoration for the young man that would revel in his nightlife, and then return to schmooze the rich patrons, she actually petitioned management to get him fired. It was during this time he attempted to court my mother. When she was just about to acquiesce, she learned he was already married and had a baby girl, Patricia, our sister. While my dad and my sister's mom had already hit rough waters, he was still a very loving father. Seeing those loving tendencies, I believe, helped my mom see what a tender and gentle man he had always been, despite his love of a good time. After dating almost 2 years, they would then plan to marry in the summer of 1973. They married at a small chapel in Phoenix and held a reception at my mom's parents' house, where so many people attended that party spilled out into the surrounding yards. It was this night that I can see from pictures, photographic evidence, that the two families really did converge and shared in the joy and excitement of young love. Now, this party was raucous, I've heard. So much so that a couple of my aunties, who won't be named, God bless them, were a bit overserved and had to be carried out to waiting vehicles offering safe transport home. Also, a few uncles on both sides of the family convinced Dad to celebrate in excess, and he was of absolutely no use to my my mom that night. She's told me about doing arts and crafts on her wedding night alone, while Dad snored loudly in bed. Despite my dad's early found penchant for partying, he made a promise to my mom to quit drinking and stay home, which he did happily for the next 51 years. He did this because he truly loved my mom, and she still loves him. They were soulmates, and I believe that once they learned they were soulmates, they would then give each other a lifetime of wonderful memories and thousands of sweet kisses. Thousands of sweet kisses. If only we could all be so lucky. In 1974, see, we're getting closer to modern times, so I'm wrapping up soon, I promise. In 1974, my parents welcomed a baby boy, my brother, Daryl Wayne. That was October. Their pictures and stories, as this was well before my time. I know that the three of them were a loving group, spending much time with my mom's parents in Prescott and here in Phoenix. And they would take my brother to the now defunct Flintstones Park in northern Arizona, if anybody remembers that. They'd go to the Grand Canyon, to which I've still never been. And they would spend time with my late grandfather, Russell. I remember my mom telling me once of her unease when my dad and his dad would speak an odd to each other. When he would catch himself, grandfather would, in English, apologize to my mom and repeat himself in English because he wanted to make her comfortable. Not only was this done out of respect for her, I believe, it was done out of respect for my father, because grandfather knew how much my dad loved my mom. Really, she could have just learned off him. It probably would have been easier. I mean, she had over 50 years to do so. No, I'm just kidding. I can't really say anything. I'm just learning one word at a time, so. But I also believe that grandfather's kindness and consideration were two traits my dad was fortunate to receive from his dad. Nearly 10 years later, and much to their surprise, they learned they were expecting again and would give birth to a baby girl in May of '84. Although Dad had to work many late nights and several holidays, he was always an engaged parent. For me, he'd get me ready for school in the mornings, and I'd see him later in the afternoons on his midday break, and then he would come home and he'd read me a bedtime story. After working in food service and hospitality myself, I know how exhausted he must have been, but he never made it seem like a chore or a burden. He loved loving his kids, all three of us. In fact, every summer, he and Mom would have saved and would take us kids on vacations in California. I've lost count how many times he and Mom took us to Disneyland, or Knott's Berry Farm, Hollywood Boulevard, Queen Mary, the beach, museums, parks. It was going to these amusement parks that I have some memories of seeing my dad experiencing absolute joy, full of adrenaline and dopamine from the exciting rides. We were roller coaster buddies, my dad and I. We were always looking for the most exciting and daring rides available. One time, I remember at Knott's Berry Farm, we were in a ride that had seats for two, right? And that would circle like a main spindle while you're in the air. And one of the key features that each car for two had its own controls that you could manipulate the orientation. You go up and down in the air, or the car itself could rotate a full 360 degrees. Ooh, not for the faint of heart, right? I remember my dad fiddling with the controls, and we would soar up and down, spinning around the central point when he started experimenting with our rotation. He had us spinning head over heels repeatedly, and I remember thinking, this might be a bit much for me. But he was laughing so I remember he turned us all the way upside down, like your hair, like hanging down, all the way upside down. And he stopped us like that. He just stopped us. We're upside down. And he let us sit there like that while we were rotating this central smoke. But his laughter was so infectious in that moment. I didn't even care that my dad felt like they wanted to crawl away and hide. It was just so sweet seeing how much fun this hardworking man was having. I'm truly blessed to have had this moment, and I'm always going to treasure that. My dad's love of thrill rides continued for many years, and I'm grateful he was able to take my kid, his only grandchild, on some of his favorite roller coasters and rides. I like to think the tradition's been passed on. My dad worked the same job for nearly 40 years, repeatedly turning down opportunities for management promotions. If you knew my dad, you would also know he felt it was easier to do something himself rather than telling someone else how to do it. Well, that's what he said, at least. Being as easygoing as he was, perhaps he didn't want to be the bad guy. Also, if you've ever worked hospitality and food service, you'd know the managers get paid less than the good servers. And he was a really good server. It was around 2007 when Dad decided it was time to retire. His knees were giving him a hard time, and being on his feet 10 hours a day certainly wasn't helping. Fresh into retirement, he learned that his first and only grandbaby was on the way, and with me and my husband Brooks both working and in school, Grandpa, or as he would now be called, knew exactly what to do. For the first 2.5 years, my baby was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with Grandpa, who adored his grandbaby. He would change her, feed her, play with her, watch TV with her, and most importantly, love her. My child was so lucky, and so were Brooks and I, to have the finest child care available, and free, mind you. I remember sitting in the kitchen with Grandpa and baby Preston, and I was doing some homework or something, and watching my dad happily feed Preston something gooey. As you know, baby food's always mushy and always gooey. Preston had enough of whatever mash it was and started to spit some out. And Dad, using the spoon, tried to clean her up and catch whatever she wasn't having. And in his usual gentle and silly manner, I remember him saying to Preston, "Ooh, yucky stuff." Just the way he said it, like, that's all I needed, and I'll never forget that. It was so sweet and calm, and Preston was absolutely drawn to his peaceful spirit and loving soul, just like everyone else in this room. During retirement, he and Mom were able to hit the road and travel like they always wanted to. Both being interested in the old Wild West, they went all sorts of historical sites here in Arizona, Colorado, Mexico, Utah, even went to Yellowstone. They called us from Yellowstone to tell us they were going to go see Old Faithful, and that there was a live stream we could watch and look for them. We logged on, and there they were, Mom in her bright pink hoodie, and Dad standing next to her, holding an umbrella over the two of them. So tiny and pixelated next to those geysers. While I couldn't see their faces, I knew they were very happy to be out on an adventure, alone, with just their one true love. What a beautiful thought. A few years later, they'd again hit the road on a trip of a lifetime, this time with Preston and Joe. They drove through a dozen states, stopping at roadside attractions and small town diners, getting lost despite GPS, and encountered incredible nature scenes. Imagine a moose staring right into your car while you pulled over to consult the map. Yep, that happened. They even made their way to Mount Rushmore and the Crazy Horse Monument, where my dad and Preston would ride a helicopter for a scenic view of the forest from overhead. Remember, he loved thrill rides, and that must have been a great one. Over the last several years, both Mom and Dad started to parent is a wound that doesn't quite heal. I'm only 15 days in, and I don't know how I'll ever get past this. Is that the way that it is? That we have love and we have loss? And those are two of the ways we measure and mark our existence in this world. I've never lost a parent before. I don't know how to do this. But I do know I was very lucky to have 40 years with my dad. And I still have my mom, who's currently fighting her own battles. But I'm lucky for that too, that she's still fighting. Dad would want her to. Dad would want us all to keep going, to keep being kind to each other, to keep laughing, to keep listening to music, and to keep tapping your foot along with the beat. He would want us all to know that he's not in that casket right now. He's on to his next journey in this universe, seeking out the Creator. And the whole time, he's going to keep smiling. He's going to keep laughing. He's going to keep loving his family and friends. And he's going to keep us all in his heart, like he always did when he was here on earth.